When you think of Megaten, one movie comes to mind as quintessentially Megaten in both spirit and design, and that movie is In the Aftermath, Angels Never Sleep. This movie is an unusual hybridization of the 1985 film Tenshi no Tamago, or Angel's Egg, created by Mamoru Oshii, who directed other masterstrokes such as Ghost in the Shell, Urusei Yatsura, Only You, and Urusei Yatsura 2, Beautiful Dreamer. Only You being very faithful to almost a flaw in regards to its depiction of Urusei Yatsura and the type of comedy, taking cues directly from Takahashi's manga, and Beautiful Dreamer showing the depth and quiet introspection we've come to expect from Oshii, which is ever present in much of his work, Angel's Egg included. Angel's Egg opens with imagery of hands and a choir performing to a shot of some kind of beast in a jar, and then to a cut of a man, then to a cut of what looks like thousands of statues praying inside of a mechanical ball with an eye shape. A voice asks the boy, "Who are you?"
誰? あなたは誰?
And next, we see the protagonist, a young girl whose hands seem to have been the hands we saw in the opening, on account of how pudgy they are. She wakes up and we see the titular egg. The scene is full of quiet and diegetic sound until the piano cues a choir to sing. The title card shows in a very beautiful childlike writing, and the opening credits accompany as we see the girl readying herself to what is possibly her morning routine. This music and the general atmosphere is comparable to Dark Souls, which makes sense because Fillianore in Dark Souls 3 has a very similar girl holding an egg thing going on that is also talked about in this video by Dark Souls historian Vaati Vidya. The score is very beautiful and haunting as the girl explores a wooded area, and there's quiet, opening to a simple sound of water as she collects and consumes some, while seemingly meditating. A white feather is pushed along the stream and we get many shots to show us trees and organic matter and shapes. The girl is then seemingly consumed by darkness, but I think it's her going into the water. Then she follows the water into a seemingly empty town. Did we just transition from Dark Souls to Bloodborne? One of the things that this made me think of initially was, why doesn't she live in this town? As she continues to trek, a giant machine parades through the street, and it seems like this isn't normal, but her reaction is so blasé. The machine stops and a boy jumps out. That's the boy from the intro. I think it's interesting how well this exchange is displayed with only gestures and slight movement, as well as some choice lighting. She mildly pulls the egg closer to her, showing an immediate mistrust, and telling him also that she has something worth protecting. Meanwhile, he tilts his head ever so slightly down, and this removes the last bit of light from his face, casting the entire thing in shadows, which indicates to me a level of criticism or assessing the girl while also giving a level of menace to his character. There's a long pause and we see the stature of both characters. The girl is significantly smaller, and the pause serves to build a little anticipation. It reminds me of when I see a stray cat and they tend to pause and then they assess the situation and then they run. And like those stray cats, the girl runs. I will say the sound of her running on the dilapidated street, as well as all footsteps in this movie, are a little unusual. It doesn't sound like feet at all. After she checks to make sure she doesn't see the boy anymore, she continues her exploration and foraging. The lights in the city turn on as it enters the night, which is unusual and begs the question of how and why that system works. She drops the glass she was holding as the clock rings in the background. We see many similarly dressed statues or corpses and many other shots giving us perspective and scope. The girl rests and we can tell she feels safe because she removes the egg and starts to basically get comfortable. She falls asleep and she wakes up to the boy sitting facing away from her, and she approaches him, and that's because he has her egg now. This is part of the tiny section of the film that includes dialogue. He warns her to keep it safe and then offers it to her. There's a lot of visible mistrust and interest on her face. She runs away at the notion of breaking the egg, as uttered by the boy, and it turns out they were actually in the Shrine of Amana in Dark Souls 2. She ran so far she ended up buying the Ring DLC for Dark Souls 3. There's a strange bit of continuity because she seems to have left her things, but when she turns to look at the boy, she has her scarf at least. She asks who the boy is, and after a long pause, the next line of dialogue is her chiding him for following her. The discordant score gives a bit of panic. It doesn't seem like she can figure out a way way out of the situation. There seems to be a moment where she accepts him following anywhere, even hiding when seemingly living stone sentries march out of a corridor and holding him close. She says the fish have come out, and it seems to be referencing the people who are fishermen attempting to catch the shadows of fish. That's probably why she does not live in the city, because they're destroying everything. They explore what seems to be a theater, and there's plenty of fish imagery here as well. I noticed that there isn't really an accompanying sound for the footsteps of these men either, which doesn't give them any sense of weight, much like the girl. After a while, she asks the boy not to do anything to her egg. We don't get to see his response to this either. He might have agreed because she brings him home. The boy talks about a story relevant to a tree carved onto the wall, relating to a bird who sleeps while holding onto an egg. The girl asks about the bird, and he asks her if she hasn't learned what's in the egg yet. She seems to have an OCD thing with collecting those jars and placing them on the steps and all around her. They walk past a giant skeleton that looks like it's from a fish, and we see quite a bit more of those. As they rest, the boy recounts a twisted arc myth relating to the bird that he once saw, as well as explaining a bit of the lore of the world. The girl leads the boy to a skeleton that looks like a skeleton of an angel. Then there's this odd philosophical discussion. He asks her if she hears anything from the egg. She says she hears it breathing, and he responds that it's her breathing. She says she hears the sound of its wings. He says that's the wind outside. And there's a long pause, which seems to be contemplation for the boy. She falls asleep, and he takes her to the bed and lays her down. He lays down on the floor next to the bed, and this is where we see that long contemplation yet again. This scene goes on for nearly 2 minutes, it seems. He then reaches for the egg, and he takes it. He uses his gun thing and ritualistically destroys the egg. Soon the girl awakes, and there's a quiet. She realizes that she's alone, and soon she sees the broken egg, and she shrieks in despair. And it's one of those really guttural shrieks, like a sudden realization that you've lost the most precious thing to you, which in this case, that's the case. The egg was linked to her faith after all. The girl throws herself into the water, and the plunge seemingly ages her, and she births many new eggs. Since the eggs float, and our understanding of how eggs work is that typically empty eggs float or rotten eggs. So these ones are probably empty, like the one she carried. We also see many eggs pushed up into the sky by trees, which looks similar to the one we saw in the beginning of the movie. We see the boy standing at the shore, and the feathers explode into a flurry all around him, and we see that strange floating eye from the beginning of the movie, meaning the beginning was the end of a different angel's life, I guess. Inside that vessel, we see that the central statue is the same as the angel we spent the whole movie watching. The camera slowly zooms out more and more, showing how infinitesimally small the city was and how oddly shaped the world is. The city obviously seems to be the bottom or the underside of the arc, then explaining why the boy told that story. And the world is shaped kind of like a seed or an egg. So my interpretation is that this is a cycle the boy has repeated many times. This seems to be related to the story of the arc the boy talks about. I think the name Angel is both a reference to the girl and the bird she found. Maybe this cycle repeats in the same place based on how it seems weird that the seed-shaped world only has one city, which seems to be built out of the capsized arc from the story. The girl not claiming to have done that weird water collection thing often may be a way of her saying that she gets reborn again and she doesn't even know that she's doing that. I think that this cycle repeats for so long that they don't even know who they are or why they're doing the things they're doing. I don't really know how to explain her becoming an adult when she dives into the water. Maybe the egg symbolized her innocence and hope, and the boy insists on logical thinking rather than her faith-based existence. Then I'm sure with her faith now seemingly futile and her faith and purity spoiled, she ages as a result. I'm not really sure if she became a statue or if the statue was there all along also. Now let's look at the aftermath. Angels never sleep. I don't know what to call this movie. TV Trope says it's an importation expansion, essentially adding and editing to an existing property for whatever reason. A good example of this would be something like the Power Rangers TV show. This version has a lot of establishing and quiet cut for brevity, I guess. They spice up the editing of the opening, and there's a new score, which doesn't seem too out of place, just a lot less atmospheric. So now the girl is waking nearly at the same time we see the opening. The cuts are interesting because they do things like chop up scenes from the very end and the very beginning and the very middle to create a different narrative, and I think it works quite well. So in this version, she sees the ship land in the water, she runs down from a large tower, and yeah, I just think it's very good editing. The narration doesn't fit in my opinion though. and now the boy is actually her brother, and she was waiting for his return. They add that her brother gives her advice and she doesn't want to hear it to explain that mistrust in the first interaction she has in the movie, the original. And I don't think that quite works, especially if you know the original movie. And this is where I talk about how bad the dialogue is for the angels. It's very weird and unrelated to the source material. She mentions she wants to swim in the clouds, and he says he has to do all kinds of weird things. They take on a weird narrative that she's meant to become a competent angel, which implies that she is in fact aware of, and he is too, and that they're both angels. Angel mentions she is looking for someone who's worth helping. Then it cuts to live action. Frank and Goose find a feather and are perplexed. The costuming is quite poor in my opinion, and there's banter about what month it is, and the song they sing is not good. The post-apocalyptic setting feels like it's just an abandoned factory area, which speaks to the budget. The music really tries to capture a feeling similar to Angel's Egg, but it doesn't quite hit it. Through their travels, we find that they're in fact looking for water, and the reason why they're wearing those costumes is because it's highly irradiated and unbreathable outside. Yet they walk casually over what seems like fresh corpses with no context to show rot or radioactive wear to the bodies. It's very bizarre and just reeks of low budget. This really shows in the next scene where Frank encounters another survivor, who I guess is military or something, and he is knocked out because he mentions that he has 6 days worth of oxygen, which is robbed. The man then goes out and murders Goose. The fight scene is amateur at best, with the shots being cut in a not necessarily planned manner. It seems to be that they decided that if it looked sloppy, it would look like it was a raw fight scene, but it ended up just looking amateurish. Frank wakes up and the angel monologues, and there's some weird editing to show that she makes herself known to him. He is surprised that there's an anime girl in front of him, but then she soon turns into an in real life girl. The next scene mirrors the boy chasing the girl throughout the world in Angel's Egg. They cut back to animation and they make the city she explores to be near where the man in the live action sequences lives. I will say again, the editing is clever, but this version is just boring. I found myself nearly falling asleep and I had to rewatch several times because I kept missing parts. Because the original had all this visual beauty and thoughtful audio and shot composition, it was easy to stay up. While it was quiet in the animated film, this seemed intentional and added to the film. The quiet in this movie seems to detract and make it all seem cheaper. Anyway, the man wakes up bandaged with a needle in his arm, miraculously saved, and now he has water too. Also important to note, the girl in this movie is named Angel, and the boy who is now her brother is named Jonathan, and they're both angels. A beautiful doctor who uses the same style container as Angel does in the animated segments comes in. She explains she saved him, and there's an air purifier in this room that still works, which is why they're in that room. The man is pretty wary of her as she pours some fluid into the container and asks him to drink it. Her name is Sarah. Meanwhile, Jonathan tells his sister a completely different story. This is about Tesseria, an angel that betrayed a friend, which led to a ruined planet, a planet without fishes. This story serves as a warning to Angel of what might happen if she doesn't do the right thing with humanity. Then Jonathan then shows her the scenes of the fishermen to kind of tie into the story he told. And then Frank drew a transition to this scene, which I thought was kind of neat. Apparently this is also in San Pedro. I don't know why they bring up a specific place. And it turns out that not only was the piano tuned that is outside of the room that Frank and Sarah inhabit, but Frank is actually a skilled pianist. The expressions that Sarah makes in this scene are hard to understand, to be honest. A montage of imagery is like intercut with the animation as the music plays over, and I guess Sarah is tired, so she stops watching. She claims to feel dizzy. She talks about how she wants to leave this room because they're trapped in there, basically. Oh, by the way, that song isn't original. It's Carnavalito Tango. Apparently, angels don't sleep, and there's a weird sort of mythology created here regarding that, and I just can't express it. You have to watch the scene. There's a bizarre poetic language describing the entire scene. Frank wakes, and it turns out he drew Angel now with the broken egg. I genuinely dislike this dialogue between Angel and Jonathan, specifically the part where she says her brother should have, and I quote, "He was lenient. He should have spanked me with an asteroid." It's such a stupid line. I literally had to pause the movie to just recover from not understanding why they thought that was a good thing to say. They talk about being fairies of second chances, which I didn't really understand because they kept saying that they're angels in the beginning, but maybe they don't mean fairy in a literal sense. And the scene is cleverly the one from the middle of the film where Angel wakes up to find the boy. The live action actress is pretty bad at no fault to her. It's just like a really bad cosplay with some fast voice acting, which I don't understand. It's like they chose shots to not show her face, and I guess you did that to extend the scene because they didn't know what she was gonna say while they were filming. She leaves him with her egg because it turns out the egg breaking was just a nightmare, and Sarah finds another feather which matches the feather that poor dead goose found, sandwiching the scenes, I guess, together, or bookending, I guess. So this movie has the egg purify the air, which was the main conflict for the live action piece. The killer who murdered Goose is still on the loose though, but it seems Frank and Sarah will start over humanity as this world's Adam and Eve. I love that the reason Angel gave Frank the egg was because Frank went out to look for her, and I assume that this was the act of kindness that was big enough to justify her aiding him. Now I gotta say that this movie isn't necessarily bad, it's just very, very low budget and a little nonsensical with some of the things that they do. I think they try to do the random is art like type of thing with the dialogue, so they say a lot of things that are nonsensical, especially in the animated segments. It doesn't quite capture the same sort of feel as Angel's Egg, but it's certainly interesting it exists. I put both Angel's Egg and this movie in the description if you want to watch it, and thanks for watching. Goodbye, fellow Megatenists.